So for those that don't know who Christina Long is, she's the founder of CML Collective and also the founder of the Create campaign. She's an amazing entrepreneur in this community and also this state and the Midwest for that matter, and is just a mover and shaker among a lot of different people. So it's a privilege to have Christina Long here on stage. So let's give Christina a round of applause.
Good evening, friends. How's everybody tonight? Look, they saw me struggling so much with these stools that we got fancy chairs today, right? It's so good to once again be in your midst, to be able to hear a great story, the background, the inspiration, the future of an amazing entrepreneur in our community. So you know we are a friendly crowd, and we need to be very friendly to Chase, right? Absolutely. So it's okay to smile. It's okay to nod your head when he says something amazing, because this night is going to be full of that. Formally, Chase Koch is the president of Koch Disruptive Technologies, a subsidiary of Koch Industries. His role there, and the role of KDT's, is to originate and invest in high-growth technology companies that transform Koch's core capabilities, create new capabilities, or expand Koch into new platforms. Who wants that job description? Let's see how he's going to handle it. Please help me welcome Chase Koch.
Thanks, Christina. I just first have to say that I love the vibe in the room tonight. You always like coming to an event when everyone's well lubricated. So this is a huge advantage for me this evening.
Very good. Well, Chase, again, thank you so much for being with us, joining the greats for Startup Grind. In fact, there's a couple who have been interviewed for Startup Grind. If you've been interviewed and taken this seat or the chair, please just raise your hand so we can acknowledge you as well. Raise your hand. I see you, Jeff. Okay. Awesome. So just to give you a feel for who's in the room as well, do we have any startups, those who are carrying startup companies? Just raise your hand so Chase can get an idea. Very good. Our service partners, those who help to grow and develop businesses, please raise your hand. Wonderful. Our professional partners, those who provide services to help support and uplift our companies, raise your hand. And finally, for all the fans who believe in the possibility and the potential of Wichita, please raise your hand. Amen. We're all in good company. Great. Well, Chase, we always like to give people a good idea about kind of where our CEOs' upbringings, what were they like, and also how entrepreneurship was introduced to you. Will you tell us what it was like growing up and how you were introduced to entrepreneurship?
I could really have a lot of fun with this one and throw my mom and pop under the bus quite a bit here, but I won't do that. No, I would say, the easiest way to kind of summarize how I grew up would be something that, as you guys know, my dad studies philosophy a lot, and he quotes, Hayek, von Mises, all these guys he wanted me to read when I was a kid, and I didn't. But Abraham Maslow is one of his favorites. And the quote that I've come to learn over the last year or two was, "What you can be, you must be." And it's such a powerful quote when you think about it. And so it's the idea that, look, if you're a bird, you have wings, you need to fly, right? Focus on that and do that really well. And this idea that you've got to focus on whatever unique skills and abilities that you have. And so I would say both my mother and father were extremely focused on, with my sister and me, on how do we help these kids unlock their potential. And so a couple just really tangible ways that they did that was, well, of course, you've got to expose us to a lot of different things, right? And so really focused on starting. My first memory as a kid when I was 5 or 6 years old was we had this thing called the 5 things.
Okay.
And so these were what our guiding principles were for the family and for the kids. And so they were love, courage, faith, honor, and loyalty. And I remember, you want to talk about accountability to those principles. At 5 or 6, you're sitting at the dinner table and he's saying, okay, tell me what you did today to exemplify one of those principles. And I want a story. Like, you're not just gonna say, well, courage, and you're off the hook. I mean, it's like, well, tell me how, right? And so that was literally, it just became part of our everyday existence. And so now Annie and I have our own principles that we do that with our kids. We started even earlier, actually.
Okay.
But I would say just one other thing that might shed some color on kind of childhood and kind of how I grew up would be, these ideas like Maslow and Walter Williams, Milton Friedman, all these philosophers that my father had studied in his late 20s and early 30s. I can remember back when we were 10, 11 years old, and we'd have these things called Sunday economics and philosophy lessons. Like, literally. I'm not joking, okay? Like, this was a good 2 to 3 hours every Sunday. Wow. And it was one of those things where, like, literally, so he would read to us this stuff, like human action. And I'm sitting there half passed out with a baseball cap over my eyes. And of course, my sister's sitting there just like gobbling it up. Just playing basically books on tape from Walter Williams and these sort of things. And unfortunately at the time, so little kind of like penetrated.
Right, I was going to say, did it resonate?
But later in life, you think back to those experiences and like and what he was trying to do. And those are the same ideas what grew Koch Industries, the same ideas of what we try to do with our philanthropy efforts as well. So that's just a little taste and a few examples of kind of what it was like in the family.
So obviously, being able to have that type of education, parent involvement is very important in students' education.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Talk about your university days. Where did you go? What did you study? What was that like?
Yeah, so I went to Texas A&M, and I wanted to do something different. I actually... One of the reasons I went to Texas A&M was I worked at a refinery in Corpus Christi when I was 17, 18 years old. So I had a taste of Texas, and I actually really enjoyed it there. And went to a lot of different universities, and it was the last one on my stop. And actually Bill Hanna, who I see in the crowd tonight, who was president of Koch Industries at the time, he's like, look, if you're going around to see these universities, if you don't go to Texas A&M, like, I will never speak to you again. So
that's a recruiting statement.
So I was like, all right, Bill, I'll at least check it out. But when I went there, it just felt like home, and they had a good business school. And so had a great time at Texas A&M, studied marketing, and then and moved on from there.
So you mentioned that Texas kind of got on your radar before Bill's threat. By working at a refinery, talk about how you went even down to Texas. What prompted that?
Well, I think maybe I'll tell a different story. So I think a more interesting story was when I started working for Koch.
Yeah,
and
that one.
Some of you know this in the audience, but back to kind of the childhood question, I spent most of my time when I wasn't doing Sunday economics lessons. I spent most of my time on the tennis court, because back to like this whole what you can be, you must be, like my father and mother applied that to everything, so to sports as well. So my sister was running and mine was tennis. It was one of those things where I was exposed to a lot of sports. I wasn't good at anything, but they put a tennis racket in my hand. I had decent eye-hand coordination. So I focused on that and became a pretty competitive tennis player. And but by the time I was 15 years old, I was starting to get burned out. And you have all these new freedoms, driver's license, expanded curfew, all this stuff. And so I'd go out on these regional tournaments. I'd just be like, I just want to go home and kind of party with my friends. And so I started intentionally throwing tennis matches, like just to get me home. And because I was so burned out, and I actually started really resenting the sport. And so I remember coming back from a tournament, my mother's in tears because she would have to schlep me around all these tournaments. Exactly. And I'm not even trying. And so she calls my father and says, this kid's like going off the rails. You need to work on him. And so he calls me up to Koch, the next day. He said, why don't you come have lunch at Koch? I knew I was not getting a lunch at Koch. Like, it had nothing to do with lunch. So I So went up there, and he basically had one question for me. It's like, you can either give 100% on the tennis court, or I'm going to get you a job. And I said, done. I was like, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm done with tennis. And so, I thought I was going to get kind of a cush job here in Wichita and still be able to hang out with my friends. And so the next morning, this old beat-up pickup truck showed up, and all my stuff was packed. Threw it in the back, and he's like, "See ya. You're gone for the rest of the summer." And I didn't even know where I was going. And 5.5 hours later, I show up in Syracuse, Kansas, and just on the border of Colorado. And we owned a bunch of feed yards at the time, and this was one of the biggest feed yards in the country, 55,000 head of cattle. And I show up, and the feed yard manager said, I live in a single wide trailer, and you're going to be sleeping on the couch the rest of the summer. You're going to pay me $350. It's going to come right out of your paycheck. And we start work at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. We work till about 7:30 at night, 7 days a week, and we're doing this to the end of the summer. So you're my new best friend, sort of thing. But here's the reason why I wanted to tell that story is like it was such an inflection point for me in my life, because, could have really, I guess, gone down the path of, sort of just sticking with the country club kind of brat sort of angle on things. And so that taught me so much about like learning the value of hard work. And I'd never worked a day in my life before that. A lot of 13, 14-year-olds, don't. But the interesting thing was, my biggest takeaway was that work and the camaraderie with the team at the feed yard. It was the first time I really felt good about myself. And came back. I was like, I actually earned whatever, $7.50 an hour. I felt good about the work that I did and felt confident and all those things. So it was an incredible lesson that has stayed with me, and a real important inflection point in my life.
Yeah, it definitely sounds that way. That's some parenting for you. That's some humbling right there.
Oh, it's humbling.
Absolutely so. So again, winding your way back to your college days, you also found another passion point that you kind of experienced in college. Talk about what that passion point was for you.
Yeah, so what Christina's talking about is music. When I was in college, one of my best friends and roommate played guitar pretty well, and I'm like, man, I have to be able to do that. It was so much fun watching and learning. So I got kind of the music bug, and spent a lot of time in Austin, kind of my junior and senior year on the weekends. And so I was like, I don't care where I work when I get out of college, I'm going to Austin, Texas, because that's where the music was. And so, I wanted to go there for the music, but unfortunately at the time, this was the year 2000, and the tech bubble just blew. It was the worst time to be in Austin, Texas, because it was a vibrant tech scene. So all these companies are going under, and I'm coming out of A&M with a marketing degree. The first thing that companies cut is marketing, advertising, these sort of things. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I was too proud to tap into the Koch network to get a job and all that. So I wanted to do it on my own. So I remember looking for a job for about 3 or 4 months, and finally knocking on this guy's door that would give me kind of an informational interview, just as we're not hiring, man. Everyone's cutting back. But I went to him and said, look, I like you, I like the team, I feel like I can bring some value here, I'll work for free. So yeah, so I'm so bored, I want to be able to do something and apply myself. So and he ended up, because of that initiative and kind of having some sharp elbows, he said, look, I'll pay you, nominal, so you prove your value and I'll pay you more. So it was a tough time actually to be in Austin, but I got to play in a little crummy band while I was there too. So that was fun. The reason I left Austin, though, I think that I want to tell this, because I think this is an important point. I kind of got, music will never get out of my system, but it was at some point, it's I got to grow up, and I've got to segue out of the college scene and get a real job and apply myself back to what my father tried to teach me when I was 8 years old. And so I remember, how many of you know Leslie Rudd or know the name? Everyone's nodding their head. So Leslie Rudd was my dad's best friend. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. But Leslie was like kind of a godfather to me, and was an incredible mentor. And I had dinner with him one night randomly, and this was when I was in Austin. And he looked at me. He's a man of few words, but you always knew what was on his mind. He looked at me and he said, Chase, you haven't earned the right to say no. And I was like, where are you going with this? And I knew right away, after it took me a few seconds, what he meant. And he's like, what are you doing in Austin? He's like, go back to Wichita, and you've got such an incredible opportunity with Koch. Koch's growing so much. You can learn from your dad, other business leaders, and get your career on track, sort of thing. So I don't know if I completely agree with his statement of you haven't earned the right to say no, because I believe anyone should do what they want to do and whatever they're passionate about. But he was right about the opportunity that I had, and I couldn't squander that. I just didn't want to go back to the feed yard. So so anyway, that was another pivotal point in my life that really Leslie helped me, and it's transformed my life.
Isn't
making
it
that
something
decision.
when we think about, again, those transitions in our lives and how we surround ourselves, there's always seems to be that one person or that one voice that speaks right to the situation, that penetrates through everything else, that hits you in your point of need. That's the team, that's the value. You had said something about you wanted to do it on your own. And then having Leslie speak to you in that manner that pierced you to be able to motivate you to make your transition back. What was it like to transition back for you?
Yeah, it was scary, honestly, because I'd worked every summer since I was 15 all the way through kind of sophomore year in college, but then getting away from Koch and saying, look, I want to be independent. I don't want to be the boss's son. I don't want to go cut my own path. But then realizing this is an incredible opportunity, and I need to just grab the bull by the horns. I remember walking into that building, that massive, building off 96, and seeing it for the first time. And it was actually, I think, the first time I'd walked back into the building when we had built the tower, that middle tower. So just coming in, being the boss's son, and having a little bit of that monkey, on your back, I was like, just a high degree of anxiety because I was so far behind everyone else that was at Koch, So, but what an opportunity to come back, and Steve Fellmeyer, our CFO, and my father, we kind of sat down and charted out what basically an inside Koch MBA would look like. But I'll tell you, it was, my mom always taught me, she told me when I was a little kid, look, you either pay now or you pay later. And that was an incredible lesson, and I was feeling it at that point because, I'd screwed around and I don't regret my time in Austin and playing in a band and doing all that. But at the end of the day, there's trade-offs, right? So that it was a daunting experience coming back to Koch, but with experience, you figure out how to shake it, right?
Yeah, so talk about, as you were transitioning back and that expectation, everything else is noise, right? What was the expectation that you had in terms of the work that you were to perform when you came back?
The expectation I had for myself? Yeah. I wanted to learn Koch, right? And there's so many different dimensions to it. I started by spending time in the accounting group and then in the tax group, risk management, worked in trading and then business development, and it's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But I got to learn the different components and see how the enterprise was put together. So I learned enough about all those different pieces, at least for where I was in my career. So that was at least, I had high expectations for myself, which also created more anxiety because I was further behind. So I felt like I had to work 3 times harder than everyone else, but it's a good anxiety, and you need to have that, right?
How many of us feel that sometimes? We know what that feels like, absolutely. What excited you about the work during that time?
It depends on the group that I was in. I will tell you, a lot of it was not exciting to me at all, to be honest with you. But it was just part of, you got to learn the basics of business.
The grind.
But yeah, it was a total grind. But I remember asking my dad one time. I was like, Pop, what percentage of your days in a week are good versus bad? And then, of course, he always answers a question with a question. And he said, well, what's yours right now? And I said, I don't know. It's like 60% bad, maybe 40% okay to good. He's like, you're doing pretty well for where you are right now. So I'm like, okay, I guess that's my bar, my expectations. But I think we can all, that resonates probably with each of us in different roles across your career, that it's not all, it's not all sunshine. So you got to go through the pain of learning things that are hard for you to learn and you're not comfortable with. So yeah, that's kind of what it was, yeah.
So talk about the transition then in terms of your role today with Koch Disruptive Technologies. What were the early days like with that opportunity and you being placed in that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll tell the story of kind of how the idea of Koch Disruptive Technologies came about. And it wasn't like I was placed in KDT. It was more of an idea that we was kind of created out of nowhere and just seeing what was a need in the marketplace and also a need at Koch Industries. So I'd worked in ag the last really 10 years, from 2007 to 2017, had some amazing opportunities to work with that group. And when I was in the ag group, we were looking at high efficiency fertilizers. We had a business called Koch Agronomic Services. And we were looking for adjacencies like high efficiency technologies, or really looking at the precision ag movement and saying, okay, what can we bring into Koch to expand into that space? And so I was spending more time in places like Silicon Valley and Boston and New York and other markets, and just seeing all this different technology and all these founders that wanted to learn more about Koch and how could their technology potentially apply to Koch Industries. And so the more feedback I got from the marketplace, the more I saw how much value that we could create for them. And I'll just tell just one quick story. There was a business that was really trying to disrupt the ag value chain and the retailer per se. So think about like the Amazon of agriculture. Just like Amazon's disrupting Walmart, this company was coming in and disrupting the retailers by bypassing the retailer, taking supply and going direct to the farmer. And retail was quite a bit overbuilt within agriculture. So this company developed a relationship with the founder, and I was like, man, I don't know what's going to happen in this space, but is ripe for disruption. So I don't know if this founder is going to win, but someone like him, is going to come in, because they had no dog in the hunt. They weren't part of the incumbency. They were coming out of Silicon Valley and creating something like, I see an opportunity. I'm going to go pursue that. And so this company invited this founder into Koch. And thought about, I was like, what are all the ways that Koch Industries might be able to help this founder? So if you think about an Amazon-like model for agriculture, they needed fertilizer to go through their channel. They needed logistics, of which we have a business called KBX that handles a lot of trucks and also sells third party, that we could help him with his trucking logistics. We had an e-commerce capability within Georgia Pacific on our wood product side. And there was a data science capability with i360. So there were all these different areas that Koch could help him grow his business. And so I kind of set up a speed dating program for him, literally, in Wichita. You got to come into Wichita and learn more about the business and how we might be able to help you. And so I set this up, and he came in, and everyone kind of walked through, hey, here's what we do at Koch, here's how we might be able to add value to you. And he walked out of that room and kind of tapped me on the shoulder. He's like, do you have any idea what you have at Koch Industries? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, you guys touch like almost every aspect of the economy. And 6 out of the 10 business units that you have direct synergy into what I'm trying to do. He's like, I can get capital from, I've got money coming out, out my ears in terms of VCs trying to invest in me, but to have someone like Koch that can help me really, bring my value creation forward and help with your capabilities, that's something that no one can offer. So I took that insight and his feedback, and other founders had a similar message. And I was like, man, there's such a huge opportunity here to bring Koch Industries to founders, like this gentleman, and do it in a much different way than other corporates typically do. And so that was really the insight of, okay, Koch Industries is going through a technology transformation. We changed our vision to embrace disruptive technology, to experiment with all sorts of technology in all of our businesses. And so I was like, okay, it's a perfect spot for Koch Industries to start something new, just focused on helping founders like the one I talked about, where we can create this idea of mutual benefit. This is really part of our vision that we just released. How can we help them win and unlock value faster than they otherwise would versus their alternatives, but at the same time help Koch transform? And so that's the story of kind of the insight on why KDT. And I was excited to do it because I'm in such a unique role at Koch. I'm passionate about it, and I like originating, I like opening up doors, I like developing relationships. But I have a unique perspective where I can think really long-term about Koch and maybe think about risk a little bit differently and invest in earlier stage companies. And that hasn't been Koch's focus in the past. So I was like, all these things are lining up. It's a perfect opportunity to set up a totally separate business. We could have done some of those investments within ag, but how do we capture all disruptive technologies and do it in a way where we actually create a dedicated business around it? So that's what we're doing.
Hence a startup.
Yeah.
Startup
it's a startup. We've had lots of bumps and bruises already. So, and the funny thing is, like, I'm not going to sit up here and pretend I know what I'm doing at all. I've had a little business development experience, but I'm building a great team to help. So. Extremely excited about it. We're trying to be super thoughtful and scale as we prove out the capability and not get too big too fast, but we're excited about where we're going.
So how do you equip yourself? You talked about a little bit just now hinting at it, building a team around you, but how do you equip yourself to stay ahead of the curve so that you, as the leader setting that vision, understanding the big goal that's ahead, that you're prepared?
Yeah, boy, there's I don't know. There's no day that I really feel like I'm prepared. Really, I go into every day with just a bit of healthy anxiety, but I wake up with fire in my belly every single day because I'm so passionate about what we're working on. But I would just say, I just lean on, I've got so many incredible mentors that I ask a lot of questions, I knock on a lot of doors, and not only internally at Koch, but I spend a lot of time kind of pounding the pavement in the marketplace of the people that do it really well and say, how'd you do it? And I try to and people love that. Everyone wants to share, everyone will open a door to you that where you talk about their success. It's not all about you. I want to learn from you how you did it. And people like telling their stories, right? And what the mistakes they made. And I think every human, their inside is I want to help others, right? So I've really experienced that in the last, 10, 11 months since we got started. So I just try to have that learning mindset and knowing that I know nothing about this. I've got great people that are really good at specific areas of capabilities that we're building within the firm. But I'm just trying to focus in areas where I can create value for the company and trying to learn as much as I can.
You mentioned mentors and how they have really provided some great insight to you. Can you give one example of some of the best advice you've recently received from a mentor in this role that you have?
Yeah, I would say this comes from my boss, Steve Fellmeyer, who's the CFO of Koch Industries, and also the same message from Mark Andreessen, who runs Andreessen Horowitz, out in the Bay Area, who's to me one of the most respected venture capital firms, and it's the message is, you've got to make sure that you have the risk profile of the shareholder in mind at all the times. And the funny thing is, I am a shareholder of Koch, but I still I don't want to make a bunch of mistakes right out of the gates. But what Mark told me was, he's like, the biggest regrets I have are the deals that I didn't do.
Really?
Yeah, and so so he talks about missing Google and the A stage. And then how just got away from it. And he never got a piece of it. And they had a first crack at it, and he just couldn't see the future of how a Google could really transform the world. So I think I've heard that from my father. I hear that from Steve Fellmeyer, who has the most incredible risk profile of any CFO that I've met. One of the most innovative folks that I've. Who laughed on that?
It was a loud laugh.
Maybe is Fellmeyer here? I don't know. But anyway, he's so I just go to those people and hear their stories. And I try to learn from them, and so I don't fall into the same trap of missing opportunities because it's like, I might lose a little money in that. It's not going to be good for the book or whatever. It's like you're building a portfolio, right? So you've got to absorb risk but do it in a responsible way. But I'd say that's one of the key lessons that I'm personally trying to work through.
I'm glad that you share that, because right now in the city of Wichita, for many of us who have been following the Chung Report and just all of the news downtown, who are we going to be as a city? What are we going to be? How are we going to win the talent war, depending on what conversations you're in? How do we quit losing talent? How do we make Wichita attractive and appealing? Chase, what do you feel like Koch's role is in this conversation?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that I think, Koch loves Wichita. I love being in Wichita as well. It's funny, like a lot of people, go to these big cities and chat with people and build relationships. And sometimes you'll get the, well, what's it like in Wichita? And kind of get that little attitude with it. And I was like, it's the greatest place on earth, And I was like, if you want, great people, great culture, one of the most entrepreneurial places in the world, and you don't have to deal with traffic, and you're about 9 minutes from everywhere, that's a great place to be, an incredible place to raise a family and do business. So that's what I always lead with. And then so they want to learn more and they come here. It's amazing, like we'll recruit people into Wichita from these big cities, and it's sometimes it's hard to get them here, but once you do, especially if they have kids, they're like, I never want to leave. And so like we have story after story after story like that. But I would say, I guess, Koch's role in Wichita is, we're here for a reason, and just want to continue to expand here. If we continue to stay true to our principles and focus where we can add the most value and stay customer focused, then hopefully we can grow. But I think we have roughly 3,500 employees in Wichita, and growing, and several hundred job openings right now. But I would say we all feel a great responsibility to the community to continue to grow. And I hope, personally, not only if you think about Koch Industries' vision and what I talked about in transformation and continuing to experiment and embrace disruptive technologies, that Koch continues to be a more attractive place all the time, better and better place to attract the best talent in the world. And I hope KDT has a small part in that as well, of really trying to create a different model than Koch has really done in the past. So I hope that also helps Wichita. So anyway, we're thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. If we get this right, if KDT does what it set out to do and succeeds, if Wichita figures out what's going to be our next step, our next stretch, and we get this right, what's at stake? What does success look like?
Wow, that's a big question. We're talking about that a lot. I would say, Yeah, the first thing I would say on that is we have this model that's core to Koch's vision of what we call virtuous cycles of mutual benefit. So it's this idea that you've got to start with your existing capabilities and what you're good at and demonstrate that a customer wants to work with you and they're willing to pay you for something because you're creating value for them. And then if you do that, then you have an opportunity to expand your customers, to get into new segments, new businesses, and then get more customers, right? And then you have to prove that out, and then that's going to point to the need for new capabilities that you have to add. You got to buy them, you got to build them, or whatever, and then that is a virtuous cycle, right? If you get that right, that is you just continuously drive yourself, and that's a never-ending process. And that's the way Koch was built, and that's the way we're going to continue to build Koch. But the key is, you guys all know this, the market is moving so fast that cycle, if we're going to do well and continue to grow, we have to spin it faster and faster and faster all the time. So the reason I give that as background is we've got to embrace that from a KD. You asked specifically about KDT. So we're early stage company. We're a pre-revenue company, to be clear. We have to demonstrate that our capabilities add value in the marketplace. That when that Koch kind of, I call it kind of a Koch laboratory mindset of where we bring Koch Industries to an entrepreneur, like the guy that was building the Amazon of Ag. We have to live up to that brand promise, and that we do that in a way where we roll out the red carpet. It's an incredible customer experience coming into Koch. We're not slow and bureaucratic. We don't overpromise and underdeliver, because that's what they're used to from big companies, right? And so we're working really hard to demonstrate that value in the market for the investments that we've made and that we're hopefully getting ready to make. And then from there we will scale, and we and continue to improve. But we need to do that thoughtfully, because I've got plenty of businesses that I've led where I tried to do that too fast and did it irresponsibly. So I would say to your question of what does success look like, we need to do that first, and so we're not thinking about some grand vision. And I think this is something that I've learned and made mistakes in the past that I would share with entrepreneurs here, is that don't be thinking about things like you're going to have some master plan that you're solving for and working backward from. I don't think that works, and at least it hasn't worked. I've tried that, and it doesn't work very well, because the market is moving so fast. You're learning stuff new all the time. You can never keep the plan going. You've got to have this what capability do I need next to add value to my customers? And then how do I capture and improve that next opportunity? And if you have that mindset, you'll just keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. So I would say we need to stick to that model, number one, and that principle, and not get too carried away too quick. But I would say from a business success standpoint, if we can build that great brand in the marketplace and get great customer feedback and we become the preferred partner, that's a squishy kind of measure, but we'll know if we're doing that or not. That's one. The second thing would be, obviously, we're in an investment shop, then we need to make good returns, and if we do, that's the market telling us we're doing something right. So I hope that we have good returns, but most important is that the technologies that we bring in, it can transform Koch Industries, so then we can add more value to our customers. So that's how we're thinking about it, and I would love to see that KDT is responsible for getting Koch Industries into one or two new platforms, new industry areas that we're not in today, new business models. So that's a goal that, over the next 4 or 5 years that I hope we can point to.
That's a huge goal. I have 2 more questions before we get ready for your questions. So again, Jacob had put up on the screen how you all can submit questions. Please make sure if you have a question that chases spark, go ahead and get it on, because we're going to definitely kick to you. But as you are leading, again, KDT, at this particular moment, at this particular time, you talked about cultivating and creating a brand. But through that, it takes true leadership. Chase, what do you want people to know about your style of leadership?
Boy, I've learned a lot of things not to do. Every day is a learning opportunity around leadership. But I would say, I strive for this. So I'm not saying that I'm perfect at this at all. But I would say the model for how to think about leadership is servant leadership, and that is, how do you help others succeed? I remember when I worked in Koch fertilizer, I was struggling in one of my roles, and I went to Dave Robertson, he's president of Koch Industries, and I said, Dave, like, I'm struggling so much, I'm getting to work at like 5 or 6 and staying late, and not spending enough time with my family, I'm just going from one thing to the next, I'm not adding value, and he's like, well, as a leader, small, medium, large business, Koch Fertilizer is a very large business for Koch Industries. You can only really do 3 things. And I'm like, okay, drum roll, please. Like, what's this going to be? And he said, you have to set a very clear vision of where you're going, and you got to connect people and communicate that consistently. The second thing you need to do is get the right leaders in the right roles. And that's a lot of work, right? Thinking about how you leverage different people's comparative advantages and get roles designed around people, not trying to shove people into roles and some org design that you've crafted, right? You create an organization around people. That's number 2. And number 3 is then, once you do that, and that's a never-ending process, you help them. You help your team, right? And I did not, before I heard that, I didn't have that mindset. I was like, I got to know everything. I have to be involved in all these details. Erred on the side of micromanagement in some cases. And I was just like, what are you doing? And so it took like basically cracking in certain areas to get to the point where it's like this dog doesn't hunt, right? And so to me, that would be my, I guess my learning and feedback is that I try to do my best to say, where can I create the most value? Make sure the vision and the people stuff, I focus on that. And then just try to be helpful where I can. And if I can't help people, I know who the person is that is skilled in that area that can help the team. So that's how I think about it.
That's awesome. At the beginning, we started with a show of hands of who was in this room. And you saw we have professional providers. We have people who are carrying a dream, people who are trying to scale a dream, raise money for a dream. We have Wichita in here. So but my final question to you tonight is, what is your best piece of advice, knowing who's in the room, that you can give to everyone here today to help propel us forward even further?
Again, I go back to what I've learned from mistakes, and I just think if you simplify, whether you're an entrepreneur, or leader of a business, you can, even with your family, I think you can, apply this question of, like, what am I doing to help others succeed? Whether it's my customer, whether it's my community, whether it's my family, and just look at the world through that lens. If you start with that idea of how I can help others, how I can create value for others, real value, then you're going to win too, right? And it seems like the most basic concept, but I think a lot of people start with, how do I make money? And what's in it for me, sort of thing. And that's such short-term thinking. If you start with how I create value for the marketplace and my customers, then by default, you're going to capture value yourself if you pick the right customers and the right partners and that sort of thing. So I would just constantly be asking yourself that question: is how am I creating value for others today? So
you've created a lot of value for us tonight. Thank you very much for taking us through your story. So again, we have an opportunity for people to be able to ask questions. And as we are preparing to make sure all of the questions have been looked at and getting ready to go, I want to say that we have been really privileged through this Startup Grind opportunity to be able to hear from some really great entrepreneurs, the stories they matter. People, they make me laugh coming up to the stage after Startup Grind, and they're just like, this is really like a revival for entrepreneurs. It's really like a revival for our community to get together, to support one another, to network with one another. And now we have, through this venue, an opportunity to connect directly with CEOs who have been able to tell their stories to us. We joke Wichita is as big or as small as you want to make it. And I tell you, the connectivity and the opportunities to be in proximity with one another, it's real, it's true. We have to absolutely take advantage of that. And so just from a show of hands, when we talk about connectivity and supporting one another, how many of you all are here from Koch tonight supporting Chase? Look at
Thank
that.
you, guys.
Look at that.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
They're not just a campus, on K96, but being integrated in what's happening with Wichita is so very important. So, Jacob, are we close to being ready? Not yet? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So while he's still finagling,
They must be a lot of tough questions. They're like, don't ask him that question.
Well, Chase, let me go ahead and just ask
Sure.
this one, because I'm sure there's plenty of people who want to know this one. And that is, when you think about the learning that has come from your mistakes, can you just give a very short example of one of those lessons that have come maybe from the idea of failure and what you took away from that? We ask that one to all our CEOs.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to go through the Rolodex and which one am I going to pick? No, I alluded to this when I talked to Dave Robertson about I just needed a lot of help. And so I had the opportunity to work in the ag business. So right now it's the name of it's Koch Ag and Energy Solutions. I had so many incredible opportunities within that group. Learned sales, marketing, trading. Got to lead several groups, and so I had responsibility for several small groups. And then when we added an energy group to CASE, so it became ag and energy. My boss at the time said, "Hey, I'm going to run the holding company. Why don't you run all of Koch Fertilizer?" And so then there were like 5 business units within that. I mean, what an incredible opportunity, right? But once I got into it, and all the mistakes that I made around not thinking about just the basic 3 things, I was trying to do everything and know everything, and it was just and so it began to crack, and I was not doing the team. I was doing the team a disservice, and we all know when we're in the wrong role and destroying value relative to someone else that should be in that role. So I went through this for about 9 months. It was bad for me. It was bad for the team. It was bad for the business. It was bad for my family. So it was like this is not gonna be long term. So I basically went into my boss's office and fired myself. And I said, about 9 months in, I was like, this just the same story. I was like, I'm not the right guy for this. And I would much rather take a smaller business instead, because I'm not like an operator mindset, like thinking about optimization. It's just not, it's not what I'm good at. And so really thinking about innovation and bringing new products into ag, that's where my passion was. And I felt like I could get out on the road and bring new things in. And so you can see that in KDT with what I'm doing now as well. So I think the lesson there is we talk a lot at Koch about, working on your comparative advantage. It goes right back to where I started and what my dad said from the Maslow quote on what you can be, you must be. Well, part of that is figuring out what you can't be. Right, and so through this discovery process of trying different roles, I figured out it's like, I know what I suck at now, right? And so let's stop doing that and focus on where I can, work on roles where I can actually add value. So the lesson there is focus on your comparative advantage and also that thing that because that's where you're going to unlock your potential. It's not about, okay, well, I'm president of this organization and I'm climbing up this ladder. Forget all that. You're not, it's about put yourself in a role where you can create the most value for the marketplace, and then you're going to get to capture as much value for you and your family and all that as well, because you're actually going to contribute. right? So that was like lesson number one for me of all like my career and what I've done so far.
Two things. Did they accept that resignation?
What's that?
Did they accept your firing yourself?
Oh yeah, he was probably like, wow, I didn't want to do it, you know. Thank God you did.
Right.
No, he faked it pretty well.
There you go. And then finally, I think you just showed us the cure for imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
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 Very good. I see something on the screen. What we got?
We finally figured it out.
All right. Amen.
So we're gonna go with a softball. First question: what kind of music did your band play?
I love this question. So what was that? I got some high school buddies in the back. They're giving me grief. I love classic rock. I like jam band stuff. I like jazz, a lot of different things. But what we would play is we had our own music, and I'm not sure if you'd even call it music, but we had some of our own originals. But we covered Led Zeppelin. We covered Fish. We covered Grateful Dead. We covered Pink Floyd. So that gives you a sense for what I like. So I don't know if anyone likes that kind of music, but I do. So I like 60s and 70s music, Talking Heads, that sort of stuff. So.
All right. Next question: if you had advice for students in high school who are dreaming about being entrepreneurs, what advice would you give them?
I'd go back to, I think how, the last question that Christina asked me, just about always asking the question, how can I create value for others, and specifically your customer, right? So do you really know who your customer is? It seems like the most basic question, but ask yourself that. I mean, like right now, and sometimes you fumble through that. Like, who is my customer that I'm trying to add value for? And so part of Koch's vision and what we believe the role of business in society is creating value for in the marketplace for customers that's better, products, services, and solutions that's better than their alternatives while consuming fewer resources. So you can use that as a framework to say, okay, you have to know, number one, who's my customer? So you ask yourself that question. And then two, what am I doing that's better than what they can get down the street from someone else? And then three, how do I just widen that delta all the time, right? Because that alternative is changing faster than ever, right? I'm sure Stephen Werner from Lawn Buddy, I'm sure he's got more, with his success, I'm sure he's getting more and more competition coming into the market, trying to take a piece of that action, right? So he's got to figure out how he's going to continue to reinvent himself and his model all the time. So to me, that would be the biggest advice is, stay so hyper customer focused and understand what their alternative is, and you got to figure out how you're better than that every day.
What's the best and most influential feedback one of your direct reports has given you?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of that. And there's a couple people here in this room that might have an opinion on that. I would say, boy, that's the most important feedback. I think it's focus on your comparative advantage and basically like get out of my shit. I mean, I think it's so, I mean, and so that feedback is gold, by the way. And so that's the other piece of advice I'd have for everyone in here, entrepreneurs, is you have got to have the humility and be intellectually honest on what you're good at and what you're not, and seek feedback from the marketplace, from your team, all the time. We believe at Koch, part of humility, one of our principles is that you seek timely and honest feedback, and you give timely and honest feedback, and it's a little bit different at Koch than some cultures because it's right between the eyes all the time. It's respectful most of the time, but that's the only way you know what to do to get better, because we all fall in the trap of just being ourselves, right? And you're just going to keep on doing what you do, and you feel like that's the right thing. If you don't seek feedback and really mine for that, of what really people really think, and I think it's harder for me as well because of the last name Koch, and I try to make it as easy as possible, where I'm like, I need your feedback, and you've got to build trust to where you're telling me exactly what I'm doing right and what you think I'm doing wrong, so I can create more value in the business. So I think that's really important.
So we're going to dive a little bit more into technology. So are you currently doing anything within blockchain?
Blockchain, wow, I wish I understood that. That is a beast. So Koch Industries we're working on, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but within Koch Supply and Trading, they've got a blockchain experiment going on to basically to take the middlemen out and trade directly, and I think they've had some really successful experiments. And then we're doing blockchain for intellectual property as well. Of which I'd probably stumble around trying to get into the detail, but it's a technology that that if you can transact directly, obviously we all know how disruptive that can be. It clearly has the Amazon effect, but the kind of the more libertarian-minded nature that I have, and I would say that those kind of technologies can create a lot of value, eliminate a lot of waste in the marketplace, and create a lot of value and create new businesses that will help society. So we're just now scratching the surface on that. There's a lot I think it's like first, second inning in that technology. So we're going to experiment a little bit, but be patient in terms of where we invest in that space.
So with KDT, and you talked about going to Silicon Valley, what was the perception that people had of KDT when you first introduced it there?
Yeah, well, I remember our first roadshow this January. We saw all the top VCs, and we already had some relationships with them through other means, through a network, a philanthropy network, and so we had a couple relationships. But we went to see kind of all the top guys, so like Sequoia Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, which I mentioned earlier, Founders Fund, 8VC. There's a number of them we went to go see. And when I went out there, I was so excited, bouncing around. I was like, oh, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to create value, and we want to be your partners and all that. And they looked at me like, okay, great, another corporate VC. You guys are going to be slow and bureaucratic. You're going to overpromise and underdeliver, and you're going to be a pain in the ass to work with. So, yeah, you want to be partners? But again, back on honest feedback of what their alternative was on what typical corporates are like to work with. That was incredible feedback for me. So I was like, all right, that's what we're not going to do, right? So I think since then, and look, it's early days, and we're trying to build relationships and build trust, but they've been incredibly receptive. I feel like we're ahead of where I thought we'd be, 11 months in.
So we're going to take a little bit of a 180 turn. What has been the best advice your wife has given you as you've grown within your career?
Can I have a shot of tequila? No. Wow. So my wife's here, by the way, Annie Koch. She's sitting in the front. She came in 15 minutes late, by the way. So we're going to talk about that. She was at work. Some of you may know Annie started a school, Wonder, and I'm so excited and proud of her for what she's accomplished there and her vision. So I would say more generally, I don't have like one very specific thing, but more generally, she's doing a startup business as well. And so, it's funny, we talked about this a couple months ago that, hey, we're both in this kind of startup world, and neither of us have done this before. And we're both kind of building the plane as it takes off. It's, we can learn from each other. She goes, yeah, the difference is, I'm building the plane as it takes off, but I'm putting my kids in that plane too. And I was like, well, those are my kids too, no, but, when you think about, this is another thing that my father taught me early on, you think about any partnership, whether it's a customer, a potential investment partner, a supplier, or even, who you choose to spend the rest of your life with. Three things need to be in place. You need to have an aligned vision of where you're going, and that needs to be really locked in. You need to have aligned values and the same value system. But then three, you need to have complementary capabilities. You both have to bring something different to the table. I just, it's like my father said about my mom: if he had searched the world over, he couldn't find a better match for him. I feel the same about my wife, Annie. And so I think that complementary capability thing is like, she's good at all the things that I'm not. Unfortunately, I can't say the reverse, because she's better at all those things than I am too. But if I have a question and I'm like stuck in the mud on something, I'll just ask her, and she usually has a pretty good solution. So she's really running KDT at the end of the day. So.
Thank you.
Well, maybe this next question needs to be to Annie then. So on the KDT side, what markets are you considering? Software development, manufacturing, technology, are there no limits to what you guys might consider?
Yeah, great question. So we're industry agnostic. And the way Christina introduced me, we talked about, our goals are, we want to bring technology that can help transform Koch industries and Koch businesses and help our core capabilities improve. So that's one. We want to find highly synergistic technologies, but also we want to look at brand new capabilities or new industry areas that Koch isn't in. I mentioned one of our goals is like, I'd love to be in a couple new platforms that can turn into something huge for Koch someday. We're industry agnostic, which has its trade-offs. It can be very challenging if you're like, well, we'll look at everything, right? Then how are you going to process that many deals coming in? So we have a very streamlined criteria that we look at. So we have kind of 5 things. 1, we score the opportunity on how disruptive it is. 2, is it demonstrated? So it's not just an early stage idea or in development. Like, we want to see that the market is really taking it, because that's where we feel like Koch can add the most value. 3, we look at how much potential it has and really the value of the company. 4, we look at is the founder and the leadership team, are they proven principled entrepreneurs? And so that's usually, cuts quite a few out. It's an easy screen. And then the last one is the mutual benefit concept, where we look at it and say, there's a lot of capital in the market chasing technology right now. So what can we bring beyond just capital, back to the whole Koch laboratory idea, and then what can they bring us as well to help transform? So that's how we narrow the world and look at different opportunities, is those 5 key criteria. But I will say there's 3 specific areas that we're very excited about. One, because healthcare is not a strength of Koch, and to me this is one of the areas that it's such a massive, it's like 17% of GDP. It's such a massive percent of our overall economy, and it's ripe for disruption. It's ripe for technology. And our first bet was an Israeli company on focused ultrasound technology that we made, which is starting to get us a lot of deal flow in that area. So we would like to really push it hard in that area. The next one is, some people call it Industrial 4.0. And with Koch, the type of companies and capabilities that we have, to really use technology to do what we do in terms of operations, reliability, safety, do that better all the time. We're looking for technologies that can do that. And then 3, this is probably not the best name for it, but it's an investment theme around exponential data. So like the data that Koch Industries is throwing off each year as we grow and unlock more data from each of our plants and assets or whatever, it's growing at like 60% a year. So how do you really take that data and turn it into great decision-making tools, turn that into value for our customers, turn it into value for Koch, create new business models off of that as well. So anything, and we kind of look at that in terms of what technologies are horizontal that that can really be applied across all of Koch Industries. So new software systems that can be applied not only to fertilizer plants, but to refining, to wood plants, because we're in all these different industries. Those horizontal technologies are, they're very attractive to us. So that's the third area.
Well, and the last question that we ask everybody who takes the Startup Grind stage is, what can we as a Wichita community do to help you?
No, I mean, thanks for the question, Jacob. I would say we're early days with KDT, so we're trying to be really thoughtful in how we add talent to the team. But it's going to be, as we scale, it's going to be a mix of internal talent, but also external talent that bring in new mental models that have more of a futurist mindset. And that think way differently than at least the way that I kind of grew up in the mental models that I learned within Koch. So we're looking for futurist principal entrepreneurs. So one of my jobs is to understand what talent's out there, and of course start with what talent is right here in our backyard. So I would say we're looking for awesome talent. And we're very opportunistic when we see the right talent, so Wichita just has to keep growing great talent, and hopefully Koch will continue to grow, and we want to add a lot of value to this community. So hopefully we can keep doing that.
Let's give Chase one more round of applause.